Today we are walking to Emmaus with a couple of disciples of Jesus, a couple of his followers. This comes from the Gospel of Luke, who had a different take on the story of Jesus than the other Gospels that made it into the canon. And I'll be reading from chapter 24, verses 13 through 35. Now, on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God, and all the people. And our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, which, by the way, was another 7 miles back. So they did a good 14 miles that day. And they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord is risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. Monday through Friday, occasionally on a Saturday, our dog Daisy takes us for a walk in the morning. Morning walks are a new phenomena for us. Because when we're home, we don't usually go on a morning walk, only when we're on vacation. But Daisy the dog has learned that after breakfast, we leave her usual domicile and domain and go on a walk. The barking to leave begins as soon as there's any indication we just might be headed to the back door. And the barking does not cease until the leash is on. There are many good things about walking one's neighborhood, seeing people at a safe distance and greeting one another. That's lovely. Reclaiming the space and being reclaimed by that same space. Engaging with a variety of landscapes, observing the various ways that different people tend their yard or choose to not tend their yard, lots of different things. There's one front yard on one of our routes that is full of flowering amaryllis. It's amazing. There are over 100, there may be 200 flowering amaryllis, white with red stripes in them. It is breathtaking. 3 weeks ago, when we were walking by that house and they weren't in bloom yet, I thought, wow, somebody planted an awful lot of amaryllis. It just took my breath away one morning when I saw them all blooming. And then until the heat wave, we'd had those billowy gray, white clouds in the morning. And one morning I looked up and there was this beautiful robin's egg blue that was hiding a little bit behind the clouds. It was just an exquisite moment. It's like hope peeking out. The flowers and the sky, the movement of the clouds, that can all be explained, right? Their colors and their movement in scientific terms. And that helps us understand the life around us, which is an incredibly important and wise thing to do. We should all be citizen scientists. These are ordinary things, but I experience them in those moments as extraordinary, as moments of grace, as moments of sacred presence even. They can be defined, but that doesn't explain how they become thresholds to an experience of divine presence, to an experience of being connected with something beyond myself and even within myself. It is in the very ordinary stuff of life that divinity is made evident. It is in the very everyday that we can take hold and experience sacred presence. The memory of breaking bread, sharing a meal, very ordinary, everyday, multiple times a day occurrence. And it is this regular practice that is at the heart of our Christian faith. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. The story of feeding 5,000 and more people with a couple loaves of bread and 5 fish is a story of experiencing sacred presence or sacred abundance in the ordinary things of life. The story of Jesus asking to be remembered in bread and wine is asking to be remembered every day, multiple times of the day, in the simple and often mundane act of just taking nourishment. The 2 disciples on their way to Emmaus, probably we know now, husband and wife, are met by a stranger who unwraps the scriptures for them from the time of Moses through all the prophets, and do this on this 7-mile walk. And in all the explanations, they don't understand that the person talking to them is Jesus. It was only in the breaking of the bread, in the ordinary, that the fog of grief lifted long enough, and they recognized Christ with them and were able to receive comfort. Almost 20 years ago, our nephew Tommy was killed in a car accident, single car accident. And Mike went in the early morning hours to be with his sister and his brother-in-law at the hospital and stayed with them and accompanied them to their home. My dad and his wife came from the desert, picked me up, drove me and the children down to Orange County, to Mission Viejo, and then took the children for the rest of the day so I could be with the family. Something told me, maybe it's the Holy Spirit, to take ingredients for Grandma George's blackberry cobbler. I knew there wasn't much to do but be with the family, and frankly, I knew I would need something to do when I got there and something to contribute. Grandma George's blackberry cobbler is a big deal in Mike's family. It is a treasured comfort food that carries with it more memories and meaning than can be counted. Mountains of food rolled in with the waves of grief that crashed over and over as people arrived. I got to work in my sister-in-law's kitchen and assembled the cobbler. And after it had been in the oven for 30 minutes or so, the smell of it began to escape into the rest of the house. And a few people seemed to notice, what's cooking? But for the most part, it wasn't observed, or maybe even observable in the fog of grief. The cobbler was set on the counter adjacent to the living room area where most people were gathered, and it was cooling. My sister-in-law wandered over, and some recognition and life came into her eyes as she asked, "Is that Grandma's cobbler?" "Well, yes," I said. And I watched some comfort seep into her spirit, into her skin for a few moments. Unconscious memories of delight and being loved and being held seemed to hold her, and she actually wanted to eat. The ice cream came out and the cobbler was served. And then the moment passed. They were just moments, and they passed. But they were experienced, I believe, because the sacred steps into and sinks into our lives in the most ordinary stuff of life. I've had people outside our tradition tell me that having communion too frequently spoils its specialness, makes it less holy. But I don't think the purpose of communion is to separate us from the daily and even the mundane things of our living. Communion calls us to remember that the holy and the sacred is all around us, even within us, in the bread and the wine, even in blackberries cooked with a cake topping and a simple syrup on top to make it nice and crunchy, in the simple, mundane things. We practice rituals so that we have little touchstones, thresholds that open up the sacred to us in our daily lives. All our meals, all our living are sacraments through which we can experience the presence of the sacred. Christ is present in the ordinary, so we can find the divine with greater ease. What thresholds is the Christ inviting you to meet the sacred today and in the days ahead?